Unlike my colleagues who've been speaking to you this morning, my task for the last 25 years in one important regard has been very different. It's not so much working with New York collectors, perhaps guiding their taste or hand or purchases so that the collections at the Met could be eventually enriched. Rather, it was going out to create a collection that we didn't have, almost always by purchase, with one notable exception, the help of Jane Reitzman in more recent times, to buy works of art that we didn't have, French Romantic painting. When John Pope Hennessy hired me in 1983 to look after European 19th century pictures, especially French pictures, the installation of the André Maillard galleries were only 4 years old. They had opened to the public in 1979. And those of you who remember them will know that if you came from the east section down the counter corridor, you first encountered the work of Jacques-Louis David, his pupils Ingres, his competitor Prudhon, and then you jumped right to Manet, Monet, the Impressionists, and later the Post-Impressionists. There was a gap, and that gap was about 50 years wide, and it was early 19th century French painting. The collectors and amateurs who founded the museum in 1870 had often been collectors of contemporary art, and like collectors today, they focused on post-war art, post-Civil War art, and therefore they almost had no romantic pre-1850 paintings from Europe in their collection. If you look at John T. Stewart, Vanderbilt, Catherine Lorillard Wolfe, the great names whose collections founded our modern collections here at the Met, they all began after the Civil War, going to Europe, buying German, sometimes Spanish, French, even English paintings, but never romantic painting. And one of the first opportunities that I had as a young curator to present to the acquisition committee was this work by Gericaults, which was coming up at auction. It had been deaccessioned by the Chrysler Museum in Norfolk, where it had been lent by Walter Chrysler, who owned two of these. One of them, there were 3 times of day known by Gericaults: morning, noon, evening. Night has never been found, probably never existed. 2 of them belonged to Walter Chrysler. One of them wound up at the Petit Palais in Paris. Morning had long been in Munich, and here was evening coming up for sale at auction. We had money in hand from deaccessioning. That's another new wrinkle to our story, because most of the romantic paintings that we bought over the last 25 years are with deaccessioning proceeds, as opposed to money raised from our donors. So we had the money. It was coming up for sale. It wasn't clear how much it was going to go for, but it was an unusual painting. As many trustees remarked when I presented the painting, it didn't remind them of Gericaults' work. It didn't look like the wounded cuirassier or the charging horseman at the Louvre. It certainly didn't look like the Raft of the Medusa either. And I made the point that Gericaults' primary contribution to French painting in his short career was to bring this unbridled emotion to his pictures. And whether it was the great Napoleonic adventures across Europe, whether it was the disaster at sea that was the Raft of the Medusa, he tried to bring emotion to his pictures in a way that had been denied by Jacques-Louis David. He wanted to intensify and grab you by the guts. And I felt that this beautiful evening scene with this very muscular landscape somehow carried the same kind of emotions that his figure paintings did. But when I went up to, just as I was about to make my presentation to the trustees, our director, Philippe de Montebello, sidled up to me, as he did too frequently, I must say, over the last 25 years, to say, "Don't pin your hopes on this one. It's not going to fly. The trustees do not like this painting." Many of our trustees had gone to Sotheby's, where it was being sold, over the weekend, to view the painting, and obviously the word had gotten back to Philippe that this was a no-go. So, emboldened by that, I gave it my all in the presentation, and I wasn't present for the discussion in the executive session after the curators are excused. But I subsequently heard that our great chairman, Douglas Dillon, had, after Philippe had wisely allowed everyone to vent their feelings about this picture, remarked to the board, everything that I've heard I understand very well, but I have to say that if our director, our chairman of European paintings, then John Popensi, or was it Everett, was it you? Yes. It was Everett. The chairman of our paintings department, Everett Fay, and our curator of 19th century French paintings all recommend this purchase. Who are we to say no? Why don't we come up with a modest amount of money, the money's in hand, and see if we can secure it at auction? And we did, and we're very pleased to have it. And like other purchases, I wanted to show our trustees how this fits into Gericaults' work, and in a sense to explain to them more fully in a way that you can't prior to an acquisition the relevance of a particular picture, not just for our collection, but in the history of art. And Philippe allowed me to make an exhibition that united for the first time the 3 times of day by Gericaults, and also to propose the theory that the 4th time of day became the Raft of the Medusa, because he was interrupted in this series. Just so happens that Henry McElnany, the great collector in Philadelphia, owned a copy of an early catalogue raisonné of Gericaults' work that had a manuscript slipped in it, and in it, that manuscript was the bill from his provisioner. And from that we could see that the canvases, which corresponded to the 3 known times of day, were delivered in July and August 1818, and that they stopped, because they were so big, he was getting them every 2 weeks. The 4th one wasn't delivered, so there was no 4th time of day as this series would normally require. And Gericaults had this remarkable and troublesome event in his life, which is his aunt, his uncle, who was his protector's 2nd wife, gave birth to a child that Gericaults, the nephew, had fathered. And that, of course, created a scandal in the family, and the expectant mother was shuttled off to the countryside so that this child could be had outside of the gaze of their Parisian friends, and the child was sent off to an orphanage. But Gericaults, nevertheless, had to hide, and he shaved his head so that he wouldn't go out in public, and obviously there was a tremendous embarrassment in his family. And the next painting that he produced was the Raft of the Medusa, which is a night scene, and the missing work from the series is indeed a night scene. And that became the great contribution to the next salon. So in a way, the series was culminated in this final scene, and that we were able to project in the exhibition that Philippe indulged me in organizing. The next big important romantic painting that we were able to buy was the Delacroix, also atypical of Delacroix's work. It's a salon painting that was sent finally to the Salon of 1835, but it began already in 1824, and those of you who know a bit about Delacroix's work will recognize that he has borrowed from great Renaissance masters in his composition. These are 2 figures from Raphael's repertoire. It happens to depict a scene that's of interest to us here in America. It's 2 Native Americans, Indians of the Natchez tribe on the banks of the Mississippi, having stopped because the woman was about to give birth to the child that's cradled in the young brave's hands. These were meant to be the last of the Natchez, as depicted in Chateaubriand's novel Atala, thought to be one of the first works of romantic fiction at the end of the 18th century, much beloved by his French contemporaries, and especially mined by Delacroix for subjects. This too was coming up at auction, and again we had to secure permission from the trustees. This was a different discussion, however. It wasn't about the beauty of the painting or its importance in Delacroix's work. That was all well established. It was whether or not we could afford it, because the story about the price was well known in the trade. This painting belonged to a British collector who had deposited it at the National Gallery in London, and he had recently and famously turned down an offer of £10 million from, it was thought, the Getty Museum. Feeling that the offer was insufficient and dissatisfied with the relationship with the National Gallery London, he offered it for sale at Christie's. It was going to be sold in New York, and we all knew that he had turned down what was $15 million. We had nowhere near that in funds. We had just over $5 million, again from deaccessioning, available to apply to this purchase. And so the trustees allowed us to go up to the sum that we had, which was $5 million in change. The painting came up to auction. We had a friendly dealer acting as our surrogate to bid in the room. And when they brought the picture up, of course, the trade knew that the consignor had turned down $15 million. And so when the auctioneer, Christopher Burge, opened it up, there were no bids. There was silence in the room. So finally, he was lowering and lowering what his opening bid was going to be, trying to encourage some kind of energy. And he said, will anyone bid $5 million? And so our surrogate raised his hand and said, bid. And so there was a bid for $5 million. And there was no subsequent bid. And we got the picture because the consignor had not put a reserve on his picture. So he turned down $15 million from the Getty. We, by a fluke, were able to buy it for the Met for $5 million and change. So that's a very happy story, which no longer can occur because people are much smarter about their reserves these days. There are a number of important pictures that we were able to buy over 25 years. Proudhon, Gérard, portraits of Talleyrand, Madame Talleyrand, bought at different times, but providing a very handsome pair that you'll see in a subsequent gallery. These are thanks to Jane Wrightsman, who, as Everett mentioned, developed her own taste, went off in different directions after the death of her husband. And I must say that our collection of romantic painting has much benefited from her interest in this area. And it's to her we owe some great French portraits, but also our first painting by Caspar David Friedrich, a beautiful romantic painting that was again the subject of an exhibition that we were able to unite related versions to show our trustees and our director the beauty of our painting and the importance of it in a larger context that extends even beyond our walls. So thank you very much for your attention, and I guess I'm to turn over to Malcolm.